Two, three, one, two, three. Okay, hello everyone. It's great to be here. I'm really pleased to be here with my fantastic guests. I will be using my phone. I'm promising I'm not tweeting. I just have questions here because yes, we do have questions prepared, but the road is the goal. So we'll see where it will take us.
You should be tweeting, live tweeting.
At first, I will ask my guests to introduce themselves. So please say a few words about who you are and who are you representing here.
Yep, happy to kick us off. Thank you. So Simon Baksys, I am the Global VP of Business at LayerZero Labs. Been with the organization for about 9 months. And spent the past 7 years before that at Google, where I was leading the Web3 and digital asset efforts for Alphabet, Noah, Marek, and a few others from those days, but good to be here.
Hey everyone, my name is Marek Olszewski. I'm one of the founders of Celo. I see that some people are still stuck in the immigration line over at the airport. They'll get here eventually. But yeah, I'm one of the founders again of Celo. Celo is a layer 1, EVM compatible layer 1 that's really focused on ease of use. That's now transitioning to a layer 2. And so on the interop side, I think the layer 2 aspect might be interesting to you guys. We're really excited today. We just launched Dango, which is the name of our new Celo L2 testnet. And so this is the first testnet that includes all Celo features, and we're really, really excited about that. And then on the adoption side, Celo's been going through, I would say, pretty rapid growth right now. I think USDC and USDT, in addition to Mento stablecoins, have been USDC and USDT launched earlier this year, and Mento's been around for a while. And yeah, stablecoins have just been kind of exploding right now. There's over 200 million in circulating stablecoin supply. I think on DeFi Llama, they were showing that we were kind of the fastest growing stablecoin platform in the last year. So there's lots of exciting things to talk about on that front too.
Hey everyone, I'm Joao Reginatto. I lead strategy and product for M0. M0 is an infrastructure that powers what we think is the first open federation of stablecoin or crypto dollar issuers. I've been at M0 for about a year now, but before that I spent 8 years at Circle when I led the build out of USDC. I'm really passionate about the topic of interoperability. My teams at Circle were responsible for bringing USDC from Ethereum to over 10 blockchains right now, and also building out CCTP, which is the Circle's proprietary kind of cross-chain interoperability protocol. I think all of those topics are different dimensions of interoperability. I'm interested in all of those, so thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, I'm Angus, or Lamps. I lead the Stargate Foundation, which supports the Stargate Finance Protocol, supports the Stargate DAO, which owns and controls the protocol. Spent the past year working on Stargate V2, which we released about 4 or 5 weeks ago. It's growing to become the largest bridge within DeFi, operating across 24, 25 different chains. Very passionate about interoperability. So, sorry.
Thank you very much, and I will wrap it up because I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Chris. I'm working at L2Bit. We are assessing all the different L2s in the Ethereum-based ecosystem. And at L2Bit, I'm leading governance, and recently I also am responsible for relationships with the projects that we are covering. So I know all these guys from the day job. And yeah, interoperability, my favorite topic, and mass adoption, my second favorite topic. So I'm super excited to hear what you guys have to say on that. And let's set the stage. So at L2Beta, we have, from inception, we've listed 79 projects to date, which is counting L2s and L3s. However, in the upcoming tab, projects that are supposed to launch probably by the end of this year, there is another 79 projects. So sorry? Only? Yes, only because we haven't added everything yet. Our pipeline, we are out of capacity to simply add them when we learn about them. So you know, the world used to be simple. We just had Ethereum, maybe, you know, some Polygon and some few other chains. And now we are in this world when there's abundance of chains. And while, you know, I'm excited, you're probably excited, but how the users are supposed to, you know, make up their mind of what is it? Like, how are they supposed to use it? How are they supposed to know what chain are they at and where they need to go to use their assets? So obviously, like, we already know, then we have to somehow abstract it. And I would like to see your point of view, like, how are you addressing this? How do you see this multi-chain world in which users don't care? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think that's where everyone is today. They're probably building their own L2 somewhere and then not here listening to the panel. That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, you know, we at LayerZero, so, you know, we've built the market-leading interoperability protocol. We connect 75 plus chains today, including Celo and quite a few others. And I think, you know, whether you subscribe to the chain abstraction theme or not, it does seem to be the direction that it's all heading in, with, you know, hundreds of L2s, so many chains, app chains, et cetera. And I think, you know, it's probably a bit analogous to cloud providers, right? In the sense where when a user is using Instagram or Uber or whatever, and they're not thinking about AWS or GCP or, you know, which servers support that. And I think with, you know, with chains, if we and many others do our job right, I think the future is probably similar, right? Where a user is using the service that benefits them most, is getting the value from said chain without necessarily picking one, and just sort of absorbing the benefits without ultimately having to make that choice in kind of the, you know, the bigger and broader applications. So I think that's, and that's a common theme, I think, especially now, but it seems to be the direction that it's heading in.
Yeah, I think just tacking on to that, I think the chain abstraction and the user not needing to care about what chain they're on is definitely the goal. I think there's probably a few things that we need to do to get there. A new chain that launches tomorrow, it's not that easy to know exactly how you get assets onto that chain, or to know what the gas token is, or how to get that gas token. And so I think there's a lot of building blocks that we can do to help us get there, at least from a user perspective. And with Stargate, for example, we're aiming to kind of unify those assets. Because as I said, when a user is looking to get to a new chain, they may want USDC on a new chain, but it may not be the right type of USDC. It may be the bridged USDC or a Circle's native issued, or it may be a wrapped USDC. So something that we're aiming to do and have done with Stargate V2 is kind of unify the assets within an ecosystem, or at least reduce the amount of fragmentation that we're seeing, which I think is a real hurdle to more adoption.
Yeah, I think the perspective that we have, it almost like sits on top of these guys, right, and what they do. And I see applications like stablecoins or crypto dollars, as I prefer as a term. They are even a layer that is not even like close to, actually very close to the top layers, right? The layers that actually end users are using, which are probably like the applications, the wallets. They're sitting at the top, and these guys need digital dollars, and they need a bunch of other things, and then you have interoperability layers and the actual substrates. It's quite clear right now that as an application developer, what I'm interested in, for example, is going where the developers are, right? And we have to be like chain agnostic from that perspective, or substrate agnostic from that perspective, in the same way that somebody developing traditional Web 2 application has to be platform agnostic, right? They don't really care if the users are coming from Android or Apple. Like, they're just going to build where their target base is. And for us, builders of digital dollar layers, this is a very, very generic kind of layer. So you got to be everywhere, basically. And to the extent that we can minimize the impact and the friction for those developers, I think it's very important, because otherwise developers will start leaking sort of those abstractions all the way up to the upper layers, and that it produces like a very poor customer experience, et cetera. I think the first time that I actually realized how big of an issue this was many years ago when somebody showed me some application on Solana, some wallet on Solana, I think, or some dApp on Solana that had, I think, 12 versions of USDC on like one screen, because like bridge versions are path dependent, so like very quickly this thing like gets out of control before like these guys started to normalize the ecosystem, and that was just horrible. It was horrible for developers. It was horrible for end users to have that experience leaked, and I think we are in a much better place now compared to a number of years ago. But we're probably still in the equivalent of, I remember a few years ago when, I would copy some files from like a PC and go to a Mac and have to be worried about the file system that was different, and like you don't remember those problems anymore. I think we're going to get there eventually to that abstraction layer where developers can actually code independently of the substrate. We're not there yet, but I think we're making progress as an industry.
Excuse me, Marek, before you jump in, I would like to ask specifically you, because like we are speaking here about, chain being irrelevant, in terms like we should not know what chain are we at. How does it look from your perspective, as you do have a chain and you do have to distinguish yourself from others? And how do you, first of all, compete with them in this perspective? And also, how do you approach, the users from all those 159 other chains?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. I think from our perspective, I think there are two things that are just important in this kind of future. One, you want to be connected. So that means, certainly being connected with LayerZero and all the bridge providers. And then also with kind of our launch today, with the Dango L2 testnet, we're also going to have in the future a native bridge as well. And so that's, I think, pretty important. But then the second piece that's important is just around differentiation, right? And so Celo, from the get-go, I think, has been a pretty differentiated EVM chain. It's really focused on ease of use. It's really focused on mobile payments. And I think that will continue, even as an L2. The ability to pay for gas with tokens is just a really useful feature that, I think for users and dApps that want to expose that to their users, Celo will be the home for them, even in this multi-chain world.
Thank you very much. And coming from that, another part of our topic is mass adoption. So I would like to, and we tend to speak within our, own groups, our own bubbles, and when speaking about user adoption, I hear way too many times different L2s thinking about how to capture users from another L2. But this will not bring us mass adoption. If mass adoption simply means one L2 gathering users from another L2, then the mass is not there yet. So I would like to hear your perspective exactly about mass adoption. How are we going to reach out to those masses? How are we going to what are you doing and what we can do and should be doing in order to reach out to those people that are not yet in this room? What can we do for them to be in this room 2 years from now? Don't be shy.
Sure, I'll start. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Like, in general, I think crypto and Web3 seems to be oftentimes a bit of a closed circle, right? We're all sort of talking to each other, to your point, selling to each other. Everyone's trying to sell to Binance, to Coinbase, whatever, and it's sort of almost like a closed system of users and money. And I think part of the reason for that is because, and actually, the gentleman that was moderating the previous fireside chat with Stani, said something about BlackRock and saying, BlackRock's playing by our rules because they're building BUIDL on Ethereum. And I don't know if it's necessarily like our rules versus their rules, right? It's not meant to be, a revolution. It's meant to be an evolution. And I think for that kind of mass adoption to happen, like everyone sort of has to work together and welcome it a little bit, rather than just sort of fight it away. And I think now we're seeing, more and more institutional money come in, et cetera, but it's not necessarily because we're welcoming it. It's almost because they kind of have to, and they're figuring out their own way. And so I think the general way should be to open that up a little bit more, and kind of welcome that and sort of educate and teach and figure out ways to bring in that mass adoption, rather than hope that everyone's just going to sort of fall in line with the ethos that we all believe in because we're here. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the random person on the street thinks about that day in and day out, how much they care about decentralization or how much they care about ownership and all those kind of things.
Until they do.
Until they do, yeah, but it's a long way to get there, right?
Yeah, maybe my answer would be, let's build things that general consumers want. I think for the longest time we wanted to do that, but we couldn't, right? We didn't have the scalability, we didn't have the custody, we didn't have the smart contract wallet support that we needed to build things that were easy enough for your general consumer. And I think all of those reasons, I think, are now behind us, right? I don't think there is really that much that is preventing someone from building a mobile app that regular consumers can use to solve their problem. I think the challenge is finding those problems and actually solving them, and that's obviously difficult. I think one problem that I think is very near and dear to our hearts and many people in crypto is one of financial inclusion, is one of payments. It's easy, being here in Brussels to forget, just how lucky we are that we can, use the existing financial rails to easily pay for our flight to get here, easily pay for the Uber ride to get into town or the train ride to get into town. There's a lot of still financial infrastructure globally that isn't at this level, and crypto actually is a really great opportunity or piece of infrastructure that can help these markets leapfrog the existing financial infrastructure that they have. And we're seeing that now more and more. So we have Valora here in the audience. We have also MiniPay by Opera, the browser company, on Celo. Between the two of them, they've onboarded 4 million users into self-custodial, really easy to use wallets that people are now using for payments amongst each other, primarily in markets throughout Africa. And that's exciting, right? That is solving real problems for real people. If you look at kind of this last bear market, searches for self-custodial wallets didn't really drop in many markets in Africa. But if you look elsewhere in the world, all the interest kind of disappeared. It was like a 10x reduction in interest. And the reason for that was people weren't speculating in these markets, they were using it for their day-to-day problems. And so I think, I think focusing on solving these problems is the way to go.
I love this perspective of solving real-world problems and building what people need. So what people need? What problems are you solving that people need?
I'll answer from the perspective of, again, of stablecoins or digital dollars, right? I think I completely agree with what Marek said. I think the genesis of crypto probably, when you go back to like the founding of Bitcoin, I think there was a clear value proposition there, right? Just this like internet native form of money, for the first time representing scarcity in a digital form. Like that actually solves a ton of super interesting problems for like a core group of people. And then people imagine in the same way that, back 30 years, like, in the same way the internet has grown to these things, like we think this can grow to like occupy and disrupt the entire like stack of financial services. But then it started from like a good core end user problem, and the tools were not there. So when you started to try to extrapolate that to other places, like we all realized at some point, right, in our journey in crypto, that the user experience is very bad. Like it doesn't scale, it's slow, it's expensive, and like we're all working on those things. But I think it's not an unusual phenomenon in some of these industries for people to focus on the application, realize that the substrate or the infrastructure is not actually quite there, and a ton of people pivoted into building infrastructure. And I think we're still in the tail end of that phase of like improving the infrastructure. And I have always been a big believer that I think we still overestimate, I think, the end user benefit of a lot of the things that we as an industry build, and we underestimate the institutional benefit of all this architecture, right? I think the amount of efficiency that like a lot of the tools that we collectively build can bring to institutions. I mean, I'll give just one example, right? Like because I'm very passionate about this topic of interoperability of stablecoins and singleness of money, right? And like the idea that you have a single dollar that a federation of issuers actually issue. I feel a lot of people like attacking that model and saying that's not possible, Never mind that like WBTC is like a multi-issuer model. Never mind that like there's a ton of examples that kind of show that that model is inevitable. People keep like trying to build like a slightly better version of the today. But I think if we continue down this path of like improving efficiency, for example, not having to have clearing houses as we have in the traditional financial system just because there is better singleness of money and more efficient settlement and all these things, these institutions then will naturally bring this infrastructure to touch end users. Because another thing that I believe is that end users, they have much less power in financial services that we want to perceive or we want to believe, right? The reason why people use Tether is not because of their perception of Tether. It's because of the use case that they use. Tether is the best tool for that. The reason why people use USDC in DeFi, again, is not because they like USDC better. It's because it makes more sense for them to use USDC in those use cases and so on and so forth. And again, if people don't buy this argument, why is it that the moment that Binance launches a stablecoin, all of a sudden it becomes the third biggest in the world, right? It's not because people loved BUSD. It's because it was the better thing, the better option for them there. So I think these are a few principles that I always try to get people to think about. Like, can you find like an advocate for the infrastructure that you're building to then bring that to a valuable use case without actually having to worry that the end users care about the implementation, because they usually don't, right? And they shouldn't.
Yeah, I think we've definitely found some use case that people are interested in. People are very interested in DeFi, and people are very interested in stable coins for the purpose of global payments or something like that. But maybe in previous cycles we didn't have the infrastructure to actually scale. And going back to mass adoption of DeFi, trying to convince a friend to deposit some ETH into Aave last cycle, for example, and he was like, I deposited $100, but actually only $50 went in because I spent $50 on mainnet gas fees. And now we've actually built the infrastructure that allows you to scale. And maybe you could do it on Arbitrum and pay much less in gas fees. And so kind of rolling that back into how Stargate is helping, actually being able to access some of these different execution environments, some of these other L2s is how Stargate is kind of contributing.
So I would like to, follow on this cost perspective. And we can speak about abstracting things away and hiding the details, from the user. However, one thing, from my perspective, something that I recently realized, one thing that we are not able to abstract completely, or at least we need to hide it somewhere, is the cost. As we are proud, and we are, it's the very great thing of DeFi and crypto in general, is that these are those like Lego bricks that we can stack together and build better, bigger things from those Lego bricks. But the thing is that with each of this brick, there is some kind of a cost, some kind of a fee, attached to it. And when recently I was onboarding, on-ramping through one of the services, I realized that when I expanded the fee, the fee description, it was like this fee, network fee, this fee, this fee, this fee, this fee. Like, why? And how can we approach this? Like, how do you see in the future taking your service also into perspective, because each of you have some service which probably plans to have some fee attached to it down the road in this DeFi stack. How do we somehow abstract away those costs?
I think, I guess to take your Lego brick analogy, a lot of these models where there are fees stacked on top of each other, the more fees and the higher you stack these Lego bricks, the more likely they are to topple. And so I think the beautiful thing about maybe crypto and DeFi is it is as much as possible a very kind of free market, and everything will tend towards either the cheapest or the best solution. And so if you do have some of these solutions where there's your source chain gas fee, and then there's this messaging layer, and there's this LP that also needs to get paid, and then there's a clearer and a filler and a relayer that all need to get paid, I think if there is a better solution out there, people will trend towards that better solution. And so I think because it's quite a nascent market, there's a lot of people trying to, or a lot of protocols maybe trying to capture value in different points, but I don't necessarily think that they will last into the long term if they're trying to extract too much value from the end user.
Maybe just to add to that, I think one place where we've seen fees stack up is whenever there's risk. Whenever there's risk, people want to be compensated for that risk by charging a bigger fee. And so one way, to your point just now about finding cheaper options, I think we can enable that as infrastructure providers by lowering risk. And there's a lot of stuff happening in the Ethereum roadmap that is working on this. I think obviously the whole L2 landscape, but now talking about base sequencing, shared sequencing, regardless of what bridge you've used to move an asset over to one chain, if you can atomically swap assets across chains with much less risk, then suddenly those LP providers will be able to charge lower fees. And so I think that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think generally speaking, I mean, everyone is not doing charity work here, right? So people are creating those building blocks. Hopefully they provide some sort of convenience or some sort of complexity abstraction that the user is ultimately willing to pay for. I think generally the established technologies, loud bell, the established technologies I think typically push for improvements pretty continuously, right, to drive the cost down. I think like Stargate is a great example of that, right? With V2 coming out, costs drop dramatically by 60 or 70% by batching transactions and finding new ways to optimize, right? So I think established players tend to make improvements to drive the cost down, and you see that with protocols as well. And then I think the other point is probably that the very amazing thing about crypto is that you can ultimately own a lot of the pieces of the puzzle, right? And so if you don't want to abstract that complexity, if you don't want the convenience, you can actually go ahead and do it yourself in many cases, and that's the case with LayerZero, right? There's two pieces of critical infrastructure within the protocol. It's verification and execution, both services that LayerZero can provide in the scenario that you want to basically get that benefit, get that complexity abstracted. But if you want to own that, then LayerZero goes away, and the protocol is entirely free to use. And I think that's true for a lot of pieces in crypto, that you can actually own it, or if you don't want to, then you pay that service fee or pay for that Lego brick.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the good side, I think the improvement that we have definitely built in crypto is the transparency, right? Because as Marek said, I agree. Like usually, intermediation is like what adds cost to financial services. But if you're using pick your favorite fintech app on your phone, usually you actually don't understand what's going under the hood, and you're probably bearing the cost of either by paying for the service or by being like an eyeball in the service, whatever the business model is, but you're probably paying the cost of layers and layers and layers of intermediation, right? And when you have transparency over those layers, usually the cost gets pushed down. Like, for example, the card networks, right? They have been pressured over time to be more transparent, and now everybody who works with a card network understands the interchange plus model and is able to kind of drive it down because there is more transparency. I think the same thing is true for crypto, right? You can always see like very, very transparently everything that is involved in the composition of a service, and I think naturally that will be attacked over time by people just trying to make it cheaper. So that's one side, but the other side is honestly, and this is one of the sides of interoperability that we are passionate about at M0. I also think there's a lot of waste in what we're doing in crypto. Sometimes I think because of the lack of imagination, I'm not pointing the finger or blaming anyone, but I think it's just, we as humans, it's hard to imagine like how new technology can create a future, right? Just in the same way, again, that 30 years ago, people thought that, scanning the first page of the New York Times and putting it online was a great way to do like digital media, and then people realized it completely disrupted the industry. For example, like the current situation in this, just to keep in the stablecoin sector that we have today, where you have multiple siloed issuers of effectively the same product, that adds cost to users, right? Because if I'm using an application of a digital dollar on chain A, and I want to move over to an application that uses another digital dollar on chain B, chain A and chain B is going to involve some cost for that interoperability. But effectively, the fact that I need to go through price discovery from dollar A to dollar B, like that's a waste right now. That I think we'll quickly get over that, and it will become cheaper again. And as I said, I think the solution is to disrupt those structures as opposed to rebuild everything that we have in the traditional financial system ecosystem. I keep getting people pitching me like, you know, clearing houses for stablecoins and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, no, please, what are we doing?
Yeah, but to follow up on that, because like one thing that stacks up on those, you know, multi-chain and the interoperability stacks is cost, and another one is risk. And you know, coming from L2Bit, I cannot not talk about risk. And you know, we said about hiding the details from the users. The users don't know, like that they are using the asset on this chain and they are bridging to this chain using this particular bridge. But those, like each time we are adding something like that, we are actually adding risks and stacking risks. And with your, you know, we had a very heated discussion with LayerZero like a year ago, but it was very productive. And I think we should be talking about it more. I would like to understand, like, how do you address the fact that each time we add this complexity, we are stacking up risks. Like my favorite quote from If Denver this year was somebody mentioning to someone, hey, we are building, you know, this Orbit chain that settles to Base and the DA is on Celestia, but shared sequencing is being done by Espresso. And I instantly figure out, okay, how do we assess the risk of that on L2Bit? Like, how do we communicate to users what risks are they taking by using a token on such a, you know, on such a creature? How do you assess those risks involved underneath in your cases?
I think from Stargate's perspective, a lot of that is we try to eliminate that away and kind of to use, I suppose, like Uniswap as an example. If I have USDC on Ethereum and I want some other token because maybe I think the token price will go up, I go and I swap my token for that other token, I'm now no longer taking any risk. Sure, I'm taking price risk on my new token, but this is not a wrapped asset. It is just an asset that has been issued on the Ethereum mainnet, but the person or the group that is taking that risk is actually the LP. And similarly on Stargate, we have these pools of liquidity on different chains. But as a user, I have USDC on Ethereum, and I want to bridge to Arbitrum, and I receive USDC on Arbitrum, but I no longer need to concern myself whether or not the Stargate pools are going to be exploited. I have my USDC on Arbitrum, and I can go participate in DeFi. And so as much as possible, moving the risk away from the end user and moving it to someone like an LP who is earning some percentage of yield, for example, for taking that risk, I think is something that we should continue to strive to do.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem. I don't know if I have the solution. I think it takes, like, us as an industry continue to talk about risk. I think for a long time we, again, as an industry, right, blaming all of us in a way. I think we didn't talk about risk enough. We actually were okay, or were bullied into like not criticizing like certain models where, you know, there was like quite obviously like a ton of risk. I think we have gotten better, especially after the last 2 or 3 years and all the sort of purple eyes that we have gotten as an industry. You know, the Terra Lunas, the FTXs, which were basically a lot of solutions that were piling up a ton of risk that was very opaque for whoever was sitting at the top, and some brave souls who like attempted to like point finger and you know, do an intelligent critique of those risks were bullied out of the sector for a while, right? I think that's definitely not something that we should welcome in any way. I think in the sector, it's I tell my teams, like especially on the product side, that I think in crypto actually people need to be experts in risk management, right? They need to, it's a muscle that they need to flex. They need to, for everything that they do, they need to think about it from a risk perspective, you know, because there's so much composability, there's so much programmability and the what ifs, like you need to be thinking about that all the time. I think for chain interoperability, that's particularly like a critical aspect. But I don't know, there's no easy solution. Like we as an industry, we have to mature in the same way that financial services or TradFi is very, very robust on risk, right? Like regulators, a lot of people I think misunderstand regulators sometimes and say, you know, oh, a regulator is going to be there to catch you because you're doing the wrong thing. And actually most of the time, they don't care if you're doing the wrong thing or the right thing. They care if you're thinking about what you're doing and if you have robust processes to manage the risk. You know, eventually everybody gets to the wrong outcome, but it's not their fault if they have managed the process properly.
So before Celo and LayerZero, I would like to maybe add a twist to this question. So whose responsibility is it to actually, to address those risks? And I will give you an example to set the stage. When Base launched, obviously, instantly, there was this rack project, Bolt, something. And the question, the question was raised, is Coinbase or is Base responsible for the users that lost money on this rug pull, or is that their fault that they got cheated, they didn't know what they're doing? Who should be addressing this risk? Who should be responsible for that risk? If we are hiding the complexity from the users, are we responsible for this complexity that we just hidden?
Yeah, I think it depends what the risks are. Your initial example was one around the modular thesis, right, where suddenly chains are being built from multiple different components that are each created by different projects. I think I agree that it's going to just take some hardening of these protocols through this cycle to prove that, okay, these are secure and that you can build chains on top of them. And certainly the people who are building these chains should take some responsibility thinking about that. I think, maybe for the rug pull example, maybe DEXs should think about, what assets they list and promote. And I know many of the more reputable ones do that already. And so I think maybe that would be kind of the answer there. I do think maybe also to bring this back to stablecoins, there's also interesting questions around the risk of stablecoins as they move between these chains. And I think here, there is this interesting issue where centralized stablecoins, fiat-backed stablecoins, for them the risk model doesn't really change because they're already centralized. They can just take an asset off of one chain and put it on the other chain. And that is a bit of a shame because I think it creates a disadvantage for decentralized stablecoins. And I'd like that disadvantage not to exist. And so I'm definitely curious to see what folks like Stargate and LayerZero create to level the playing field on this front. And obviously, I think the work already is really helping, but I think there's more potentially to be done.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting problem and a very interesting concept because, in Web 2, the typical user will trust Google because it's a $1 trillion company and they have 10,000 security engineers and a big reputation, a lot of money, and it's like, well, if something happens, that's okay. They're going to figure it out. In Web 3, it's sort of the complete opposite, where we don't want to trust a centralized party, and we almost lean too far the other way on the accountability piece, right? Where it's just like, well, I don't know, I'm just giving you those Lego blocks, and you sort of figure it out, and if you screw up, then it's sort of your fault. I think it's kind of the general perspective. There's probably a balance there where folks do need to take a little bit maybe more accountability. And I think to the previous point that Mark was making on the other question, which is, if you start taking on that risk, then maybe that's where you can also charge a bit more, right? Or people maybe can trust you more or pay you for that because you're owning more of that risk. So it sort of starts to balance out to some extent. From a LayerZero perspective, one of the big things that we introduced this year with V2 was actually letting the applications own the security, right? So instead of us sort of being accountable, the application owner itself, whether it's a stablecoin that's building on our OFT standard, whether that's an application that's verifying messages back and forth, they're in charge. They can be in charge if they want sort of the validation and the attestation of the messages and sort of owning that security. So that's sort of another way to address it, is maybe give the ownership of security. Another way would be to provide more transparency, right, so people can look into it, or own the risk and charge for it.
Okay, thanks. Before we finish, there is one last thing that I want to touch upon, because coming back to mass adoption. And, I think we made quite a good progress in for mass adoption in terms of retail, making sure that users can easily on-ramp and even off-ramp. We also made a pretty good progress in onboarding institutions. We are mentioning BlackRock, Securitize, Franklin Templeton. A lot of them, the interest is already there. But what about the backbone of economy, the SMBs, like small businesses, those hundreds and thousands of businesses? I don't see them using crypto that much right now. The promise that we'll be able to pay in store using crypto without going through normal rails of financial providers, it seems not to be there yet. Like, what is your approach there? Like, how do you address this? Do you even think about it?
I think it goes back to the earlier points that were made in terms of building things that make it obviously simple. What I would actually compare that to is, I think it's a bit analogous to like mom and pop shops and little restaurants accepting credit cards, right? The world was sort of moving towards digital money, but mom and pop shops are still, not necessarily embracing that, maybe still doing cash, having, old systems, et cetera. And then, things like Square and Toast come around, we're making point-of-sale systems extremely simple and extremely cheap, right? And then you see every little pizza shop around the corner having a little, that's all you need to do is just tap a card. And I think that's sort of the similar thing here. If you think about sort of smaller businesses and thousands of people, et cetera, is just making things awfully simple.
Yeah, I like that. I think part of it is the infrastructure. We talked about how the infrastructure maybe wasn't there before, and I think now it is. Merchants probably want to receive payments in a stablecoin of their choice, and maybe on a chain of their choice, and people want to pay perhaps with their own stablecoins on chains of their choice. So Interop was certainly one of the really important pieces of infrastructure that we needed to build, and now we have it. I think the other thing is that retail needs to have lots of stablecoins to pay with, right? I think SMBs will take money from people who have it. And I think, again, here in developed countries, the need is perhaps smaller. I mean, I'm just kind of curious, how many people here have stablecoins on a really easy to use kind of wallet and they split the bill at a restaurant with them? Like, how many people actually do that? I split the bill yesterday, but I'm kind of curious how many of you guys do. Right? I think this is the reason, right? Like, if you're not holding stablecoins in a wallet in your pocket that you can then buy coffee with, why would that merchant start accepting those stablecoins? But I think if you ask in emerging markets, I think the answer is very different. Where the financial rails aren't as good as we're used to here, people are using these stablecoins. So I think the answer to your question is this will happen and is happening already, but it's not happening here, it's happening in emerging markets. And there is one project that is on Celo that is actually working on this. They've been doing a lot in Peru lately, and I was just showing you this card a second ago. This makes me really excited. This is a self-custodial wallet with a private key inside, and they've created a POS where you can tap to pay. So it's the same.
Without traditional rails,
Without traditional rails. This is fully settled on chain. The private key literally signs a transaction that gets beamed over NFC to the card. And so it's the same UX that we're used to with credit cards, but it's fully self-custodial, fully on chain. And it's happening with kind of Mentos stablecoins, again, Mentos in the audience, in some emerging markets, and I think it's only going to grow in adoption as stablecoin adoption grows.
Yeah, the way that I think about that is democratizing access to like a lot of these layers in the stack, right? I think I don't spend my time thinking directly about SMBs or necessarily directly about like the end user stablecoins, but I do think that in the experience that I have had in my life being a fintech builder, even before like my crypto life, it is extremely hard. It is extremely hard to innovate in financial services. I think there's been a lot of development in this sector in the last 30 years, but most of it is it's a bad term, but most of it is what you would call lipstick on a pig. Like people haven't really innovated in these services. They kind of improved the front end, the facade of it, but things still shut down on a weekend. They don't work, after 5 p.m. on a weekday or like all those sorts of things. And also, the bar for innovation is super, super high. Like you have to have a ton of resources. You have to have really understand like beyond the technicality of things, legal risk, like a lot of capability. And one of the beliefs that I think I have with stablecoins as a piece of technology, as a layer in a stack, if you will, is to promote this democratization of access to people building these services faster and iterating on it more securely, so that more people can effectively, and I think we have seen this in crypto already. Sometimes I feel like we are iterating on something that took the traditional financial services 40 years to go through. We have done in like 2, right? So I think we will get there, but we continue to, I think the topic for me, the theme for me that I believe in, can you lower the bar for people to iterate and innovate in a more democratic way on these rails? And I think that's how we're going to get to serving those needs that you mentioned.
Yeah, the point that I was going to make was that final point there, that I think we will continue to iterate and innovate. Like, that is one thing that this space does really well, is it moves really fast and often breaks things, and hopefully will break less things going forward. But also extending outside of kind of financial applications and decentralized finance. I wrote my thesis kind of many years ago about bringing data health records on the blockchain, for example, and the conclusion of the thesis was that it wasn't possible. Like, we don't have the technology that we needed, but already a couple of years later, like, there's a lot of infrastructure that could now be used to help facilitate that. And so I think as a lot of the infrastructure layer continues to innovate and just become easier to build on, we will see more applications that kind of extend out to these smaller SMBs and give them no choice, similar to when Square kind of launched, and it made their life a lot easier. And I think we'll get to that point as well, eventually as well, where they will realize that it makes their life easier or better for whatever reason, maybe it's security or transparency, and I think at that point is when we will hit mass adoption, quote unquote.
Okay, this screen tells me that while the road is the goal, our road is at the end. So thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to my fantastic guests.